Baseball is a cruel game. You can do everything right and still not have it go in your favor. We've all been there where you absolutely smoke a liner and it goes right to somebody. Or as a pitcher, you get that ground ball you're looking for to get you out of an inning, get a double play going, and nobody's there to field it. Lady luck sometimes is just not on your side. Now, when you combine this with players having an off season to retool and make adjustments for the upcoming season, every year we see guys that just burst onto the scene or absolutely bounce back from a down year. So today, let's take a look at some players that could be in line for a huge improvement on their numbers from last year going into 2023. This is Smarter Baseball, where we deep dive into everything going on throughout Major League Baseball. If you enjoy the content, go ahead and support the channel by liking the video, subscribing to the page, and turning on notifications so that you don't miss out on any future content coming up and you can support the channel and help us grow. Go ahead and follow on social medias. Links are down in the description. So we have 5 hitters and 5 pitchers who are set for bounce back / breakout seasons headed into 2023. But before we get to them, once again, real quick, we need to go over one of the main tools we're going to be using for this, and that is WOBA. WOBA, or weighted on-base average, is basically a measure of how productive a batter was towards creating runs, and you do this by adding up all of the value of the counting stats that he built up over the season. So all of his walks, hit by pitches, singles, doubles, triples, and homers. All of these have an expected run value attached to them, which is basically the amount of runs that typically get scored when this thing happens. You add up all of the value of the counting statistics for an offensive player, and you divide it by the number of times that the guy came up to bat and wasn't intentionally walked. This gives you a number that's actually pretty similar to on-base percentage. So if you know what a good and bad on-base percentage looks like, you know what a good and bad WOBA look like. Now, expected WOBA takes into account exit velo and launch angle and ball direction and all of this stuff, and estimates on average what the counting statistics should have been based on how a guy was hitting the ball. So by taking the difference between WOBA and expected WOBA, we can kind of get a measurement of how maybe lucky or unlucky a player was based on maybe some freak weird fielding stuff or just some plain bad luck. So looking at some of these guys that were maybe average to below average on the field, but the expected stuff says that they were actually supposed to have been doing pretty good, and looking at the rest of their numbers and seeing how stuff should kind of improve or bounce back, we can start getting into the players that are going to break out next year. And let's start first with Detroit's Matt Vierling. So first, Baseball Savant had the average WOBA in MLB this year at 316. The average expected WOBA was 315. Vierling had a WOBA of 285, but an expected WOBA of 327. So that's a pretty big gap. Vierling's only 25, and he had a pretty noticeable above average line drive percentage, was hitting the ball pretty hard and pretty hard consistently. There had to be some bad luck in there. This is a guy that is not gonna whiff. He's pretty patient at the plate, not swinging a whole lot, and he doesn't strike out all that much. Now, he's not walking a ton, but he still keeps a pretty good ratio between the two of them. So if you take kind of all of this into account, maybe some better luck next year with those line drives, as well as everything just kind of improving as he ages and gets a little bit more experience here, his 648 OPS from last year should improve quite a bit. Next up, we're going to go with a little bit more of a veteran player here, and this is going to be Minnesota's Max Kepler at 29 years old, who had a WOBA of 298 last year, but an expected WOBA of 338. Now, Kepler is just like Moneyball Brad Pitt's ideal type of player. Walking a ton, never really striking out, just an insanely good approach at the plate. The problem is that still only resulted in a 666, praise the Lord, OPS last season. His exit velo, hard hit percentage were both above average. He wasn't chasing, wasn't whiffing, wasn't swinging a ton. just the batted ball results really didn't go in his favor. The only thing that was slightly below average was the line drive percentage. So if he starts squaring the ball up just a little bit more, gets that barrel percentage just a little bit higher than the tick above average it is right now, I mean, this guy could be like, how do you pitch to a guy that's not gonna go after the garbage that you throw up, and then you give him something good and he squares it up? All right, now let's head out to Washington, get back to the young guys, and we're gonna look at Keibert Ruiz, who is a guy that is just absolutely not gonna strike out. His strikeout percentage was almost half of the MLB average last season, and now he's not gonna walk a ton, but it doesn't matter when you don't strike out that much because you still keep an insane ratio between the two of them. He only had a 672 OPS last season, but this was due to a 299 WOBA despite a 328 expected WOBA. Now again, Ruiz's main tool is just that this dude's gonna put bat to ball. You are not gonna strike him out. He is not whiffing hardly at all. So if he can get this exit velo, hard hit percentage, maybe get a little bit more barrels, get a little closer to average, if he just starts hitting the ball a little bit better, we could see something ridiculous from him. I mean, this would be a guy that, like, as a pitcher, you're sitting there on like the 9th pitch of an at-bat going, what the fuck do I have to throw to get this guy to miss? So now let's go out to St. Louis for a guy who's like the exact polar opposite of Ruiz, and that is Tyler O'Neill. O'Neill had a 700 OPS and a 307 WOBA last year, but an expected WOBA of 331. Now he's a guy, he'll take a couple walks here and there, but he is gonna strike out quite a bit, and that's where this ends up hurting him. But we know what he does, and what he does well is hit the ball really hard. I mean, dear God, just look at those muscles. Okay, that's all I'll say about that. Now, O'Neill is a pretty patient hitter, actually, not chasing a ton, not really swinging all that often. He just has that swing and miss tendency, which, with how hard he swings, yeah, give him that. But he was on again, off again with injuries this last year, so if we get a healthy Tyler O'Neill back next year, maybe those whiffs come back just a little bit more down to earth. With how hard he hits the ball, good things will happen if you put the ball in play enough times. And for our last hitter, we're gonna take a trip out to a World Series contender, the Philadelphia Phillies, and Alec Bohm, who had a 713 OPS last year and a 310 WOBA, so not terrible, but his expected WOBA was 333, and he's got a pretty decent approach, really just limiting the strikeouts. I mean, he's, again, I don't know what it is with me in this list, but guys that just do not want to strike out. Now, Bohm didn't put up a ton of power numbers really this last year, but this is a guy that I think could be. His exit velo was noticeably above average, as well as the hard hit percentage. He just has the tendency, he's a pretty free swinger, but he's gonna put bat to ball. Maybe if he can be just a little bit more patient and turn some of these grounders into fly balls, try to lift the ball a little bit more with that power and that hard hitting tendency, good things could really happen for this guy. So now for our pitchers, and of course, we gotta start the game with our starters. So we're gonna head out to Boston and look at Brian Bayo, who I already talked about in a previous prospect video. So if you want a real in-depth look at his minor league season last year, go ahead and check that out. The 23-year-old rookie put up a 4.71 ERA in 11 starts due to a 355 WOBA allowed. But he had an expected WOBA of 303, so the underlying numbers point towards he was pitching better than it showed on the surface. He was already missing barrels, getting whiffs, and getting guys to just top the ball because he was getting in the zone first pitch pretty often, but he was struggling to stay in the zone consistently. As he gets his command, we could see all of this stuff take a drastic step forward, along with maybe getting a little bit luckier than he was this year. And now I guess I might as well go with a rookie in the National League. So let's go to Milwaukee, where we'll talk about Aaron Ashby, the 24-year-old who had a pretty high strikeout rate, but still gave up a 4.44 ERA in 19 starts, a 331 WOBA allowed, but he had an expected WOBA of 301. That's because this high strikeout stuff that he has, high whiff stuff, is limiting the exit velo against him, limiting the hard hit percentage, and getting guys to just hit a ton of soft ground balls. He gets in the zone pretty consistently, but he could still do it first pitch just a little bit more. And dear God, if he can get even more ahead of guys and get them even more on their back foot, this guy's gonna be an absolute nightmare to face. And now for a veteran who's due for a bounce back season, as the entire rest of this team is, it's the Chicago White Sox, and it's Lucas Giolito. The 27-year-old last season had a 4.9 ERA in 30 starts, a 344 WOBA against, but the 318 expected WOBA, not terrible. And as we get more to the deeper layer stuff on this guy, that could go down pretty far. Again, we have just a high strikeout, high whiff kind of stuff, but struggles just a little bit with the walks, and that's where the problem lies for Giolito. He doesn't stay in the zone very consistently, so guys can just sit back a little bit more, look for something good to lift, which they do. So when he starts to attack hitters again a little bit more, I mean, we've seen the type of pitcher that he can be. Can he get back there? I think he can by getting those walks under control. All right, let's go to the pen. We're calling in our first reliever, and that is Ian Jabot of the Cincinnati Reds. I'm so proud that I got that name right. The 28-year-old put up a 4.5 ERA last year, a 354 WOBA allowed, but his expected WOBA was 282 because insane strikeout stuff. He does not get barreled, so he limits the exit velo, stays in the zone pretty consistently, just letting this swing and miss stuff go. But he takes a second to get there. So maybe if he can flip some of these 1-0, 2-0 counts that he keeps finding himself in, he already just gets a ton of pop-ups and a ton of strikeouts. Those are only gonna go up. And now our last player from the Los Angeles Dodgers, we have 25-year-old Michael Grove, putting up a 4.6 ERA, a 335 WOBA allowed, but a 275 expected WOBA. Grove is your typical control artist, limiting the walks by just living in the strike zone. The problem has been that guys can kind of sit back and tee off on him because once again, he's struggling to find that zone on the first pitch. So if he starts flipping these 1-0 counts into 0-1 counts, and maybe gets a little bit luckier with some fielding behind him than he was this last year, his numbers could go up drastically. These are the 10 players that I think could bounce back, break out, whatever you want to call it, in 2023. Comment down below if you agree with these, who you think is going to be breaking out in 2023, just any wild predictions that you have for this season. As always, thank you for watching, especially if you got this far in this kind of a video. Go ahead and show your support for the channel by liking the video, subscribing to the page, and turning on notifications so that you can help us grow, provide you with higher quality content more often, and you don't miss out on anything coming up. Once again, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Have an awesome day, and I'll see you in the next one.